good evening to you all at Mansfield Pentecostal Church. Welcome to the Bible study for tonight. Some of you may recognise me. For those that don't, my name's Dan. I was leading Redeemer King Church in Chesterfield, and so I'd come across to Mansfield a couple of times to be with you on Sundays. So it's great to be able to be with you online. Matt kindly invited me to share with you, so that's great. I now work for a charity called Open Doors. You may have heard of them. They work with the persecuted church. And so for our study tonight, I wanted to look at a passage that covers persecution, its reality and what we do about it. I'm going to share a couple of stories with you as well. I want to share with you from Hebrews 13, verses 1 to 3. Hebrews is a book that's written to persecuted Christians, that they would be inspired in their faith and they'd be encouraged. So this is an encouragement that whatever challenges we face in life, we can find encouragement and purpose. And when we're considering the persecuted and the mistreated, Jesus taught us in Matthew 25 that providing food for the hungry, water for the thirsty, welcome to the stranger, visits for the sick and imprisoned are part of what it means to follow Christ. Truly, as I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it for me. It's a mandate from Jesus that we are to demonstrate compassion for our brothers and sisters. And by doing so, it's the same as if we were doing it for Jesus. So, Hebrews 13, 1 to 3, that's the passage we're going to look at, says this: Let brotherly love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. Remember those who are in prison, as though in prison with them, and those who are mistreated, since you also are in the body. He leads 13:1 with, let brotherly love continue. The author is talking about relationships within the church. How do you and I love one another? How are our relationships going to be marked by love? After all, the greatest commandment is to love God and love our neighbour. And for me, it's always begged the question, how? How do I show love to my brother and my sister? And how do I show love especially to those in need, those who would be strangers to us? Well, it's demonstrated in this passage. It gives a couple of great examples of what it means to love and to show love. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. We're to show hospitality. Back in the day, if you were visiting anywhere, your accommodation choices were limited. Inns had a reputation of great expense and immorality, so the onus was put onto the church to show hospitality to those who travelled, to welcome strangers into your home, to extend food and drink and supplies. And the application is much the same for us today, despite COVID, is we as Christians must be prepared to serve others at a cost to ourselves. Hospitality, therefore, is a great act of faith. It's not just having someone over for a meal on a Sunday, it's an act of faith, that God's provision will bear the expense of giving away, the expense of hosting, the expense of giving financially and supporting others, that the time we invest is not in vain. It says as well, I don't want you to get hung up on this, who knows, some have entertained angels unaware. It doesn't mean that we have, and I know Matt has been teaching on angels and demons. It's not really the main point of the text. It's not like it's pressing it. It's not saying everyone who visits you is an angel, but it's throwing you back to Genesis 18, where Abraham hosted some angels. He fed them, he washed their feet, he gave them rest, and he escorted them on their journey. The point being is this: it's better to give the benefit of the doubt and treat strangers as valued guests and live life in a worthy way than to not. Because who knows? Who knows who they could be? And it's what Jesus presses in Matthew 25. If you do this for even the least of you, your brothers, you do it for me. So what could that look like? Well, I don't want to answer that for you actually, this hospitality to strangers. I want that to be one of the questions that you reflect on following this study. The next part of the passage is really interesting. What about those who can't visit us? Those who have been forgotten by the world, those who have had their freedom taken from them, the most persecuted, those who are treated differently because of their faith, those who are imprisoned for following Jesus, for example. Around the world right now, we reckon there's around 260 million Christians who are persecuted in quite extreme ways for their faith. Some of them are imprisoned. Hebrews 13:3. Remember those who are in prison as though in prison with them, and those who are mistreated since you are in the body. Imagine with me if you were imprisoned for your faith in Jesus. What would you need? If it were me, I'd want visits, if that were possible, encouragement, I'd love a Bible, prayer, provision, food. This is what it means to remember those in prison as though with them, that we would provide for them, to place ourselves in their shoes and say, what do they need? What would they want? How can they be helped? And then we're to do it. It's active. It's not a casual, oh, I remember them. It's an active thing. Let me tell you about Peter. Peter was imprisoned in Eritrea for his faith. I'm not using his real name for security. But he was arrested. All he was doing was attending a secret Christian gathering. That's what he was doing. Just like us going to church. For over 6 years he was held without any charges, and he was frequently moved from prison to prison. Once he was in a prison cell that was so narrow, the only thing that he could do was lie down. It was like a living coffin. For 5 months he was in there, and then from there they took him straight there to an underground cell that was completely dark, and they kept him in there for a further 6 months. When they pulled Peter out of this hole, he was nearly blind and his legs were paralysed, and by the grace of God, his sight has returned and his legs were healed. And these were Peter's words. He said, I was asked on many occasions to recant my Christian faith, but I refused. And when I refused, I was punished. Sometimes I was not given food. I had no water. I was made to work in the hot sun, hungry and thirsty. It was painful. Sometimes we just got tied up and left outside in the sun. The police threatened to arrest my family members if I didn't recant my faith, but I didn't want to because I didn't want to leave Jesus. The document that they tried to make Peter sign read this: from now on, I will not preach, I will not meet other Christians, I will not talk about Jesus. And Peter and his friends, they refused to sign this document. They're saying, I'm not going to deny my faith in Jesus, because if I do that, these last years will just be a complete waste. I'd have suffered in prison for nothing. So Peter was locked up again, but he was resolved to escape. And so Peter and 2 of his friends, they had no shoes, just the clothes on their back. To the sound of gunfire, they ran for their lives. In fact, Peter didn't stop walking and running until he reached a refugee camp, which was 200 kilometers away. Even there, he wasn't safe. He wasn't beyond the reach of the persecutors. But thanks to open doors and our partners and Christians on the ground, Peter was moved beyond the reach of those who were getting him. And speaking from that place of safety, he reflects, I see that I lost my freedom. I also see now that I'd lost time. I couldn't continue with school. I couldn't get skills training. I don't know how to do any office work. I can't even see myself marrying now and having my own family. I'm almost 40 now, and I have to start again from nothing. But then he smiled and he concluded, but I still have Jesus, and he is worth it all. What does it mean when it says, remember those in prison and standing with those in prison? Well, it means encouraging people like Peter, supporting them, praying for them, lifting up our family. But also, I believe it's allowing their stories to inspire us. You know, when Paul's in prison and he's writing to churches, he wants the fact that he's witnessing in prison to stir the church to action in sharing the gospel. And I think it's the same with the persecuted church. Is Jesus worth it all for you like he is Peter? Does your faith in Jesus stir you to action like it does Peter? To live for him in this moment? To not put off hospitality or generosity or care? Let me ask you this question. If Jesus was coming back next week, what would you change in your life? What would you seek to do, to share? It shouldn't change a thing, because we should be living like Jesus is coming back. Remembering when we say, yes, Jesus is worth it for me, well, before that, you were worth it to him. Remember those in prison as though with them, and those mistreated since you are in the body, as a reference, a beautiful reference to the church. We're one family, aren't we? the children of God, one body, and we cannot therefore separate ourselves from the needs that are all around us, the needs that are in Mansfield, the needs that are in the persecuted church, the needs that are on our planet. We can't just congregate in our holy huddle and not care for the world around us, for the Christians outside of our circle. We're those to be the hands, the feet for those most persecuted for their faith in Jesus. Just before lockdown, let me finish with this story. I met a man called Mushtaba, an Iranian Christian pastor that fled Iran due to persecution. He's a church leader of a secret underground church that was raided by secret police. He was thrown into solitary confinement and then imprisoned. And for the majority of his sentence, he was with murderers, robbers, drug dealers. No one could be trusted, and he struggled to find hope and purpose. He didn't even know when or if he'd ever be released. And so, going from leading church to being behind bars, he just felt there was no plan and purpose for his life. Yet God would use him even there. He started to share his testimony, to share the gospel with other prisoners. Some came to faith, but he really wanted a Bible. And it was proving impossible. You could get all sorts of things into an Iranian prison, but getting a Bible into an Iranian prison, that's not easy. But God had a plan. A Muslim imam had an idea. He would bring in printouts of the Bible disguised as English lessons, and then they'd be translated into Farsi, their language, and then spread around the prison. So a Muslim imam facilitated the advancement of the gospel in an Iranian prison. Mushtaba said this to me, and this is the challenge I want to bring to you. Going to prison, the isolation, we've experienced some of what that might mean over the last few months. It was worth it. I'd do it again to see someone put their trust in Jesus. I never actually prayed for God to release me from prison. I can serve God anywhere, inside, outside prison. It doesn't matter what situation I'm in. I can work in God's kingdom wherever He places me. This evening, as you reflect upon your own walk with God and you think of our brothers and sisters around the world, where's God placed you? What difference can you make? How can we serve those forgotten by the world? When we read Hebrews 13, as we reflect on these verses, what are we going to do? I'd love for you to check opendoorsuk.org out for further ways that you can raise awareness, you can pray, and you can support our persecuted family. Because we need to let brotherly love continue. I'd love for you in your groups to look at this passage. Hebrews 13, 1-3. Delve into it. Have a look at it. What does it mean in its wider context of the letter to the Hebrews? But also, what does it look like? This is the question. What does it look like for you to show hospitality to strangers? How could you do that? What could you do in Mansfield, as a community, as individuals? And where has God placed you to stand with the broken and to stand with the most persecuted? Thank you so much, guys, for having me. Be praying for you all. God bless.